We'll have now the Q&A, and I'd like to start making some comments and asking some questions. We had the opportunity to talk earlier, and I was really interested in the interaction between the characters and how you could capture that really well. Do you think how do you think that people living in the favelas see these foreigners, these British foreigners living there, and also how do they see what generally speaking, what do you think was their impression in terms of what the Olympics would bring to them and to their everyday lives?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for watching. It's really an honor to present the film here. To answer your question, Eric, I think the people who were living in the favelas that I saw with the characters that I filmed, I think as soon as they realized that these people were here not to exploit them and were not there to try and benefit off of them in some way, when they saw that these guys were active in the community and they were sort of just ready to get stuck in and get acquainted with the place and meet their neighbors and see what they could do to help, I think they were touched, because when people go through, they have these Jeep tours that you can go on, and someone offered me that when I first got to Rio, and I said, that sounds like a safari or something. It's very strange to go through people's neighborhoods photographing them from a Jeep. It's totally not my thing at all. But when you live in a favela and you see strangers coming by and snap, 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 it's like that's very discouraging and humiliating for them. But when you have people walking around, shaking hands, going for a beer, trying to learn the language, starting a music school, then it's a different scene. And so I think they embrace these characters. And in terms of what they thought the Olympics might do for them, I think, like most people probably in Brazil and certainly in Rio, when they heard of these mega events, when they were announced, there was a lot of pride and celebration, and it's obviously a huge opportunity economically and for the infrastructure of any place that these events come to. However, it wasn't long before the people in the favelas, especially the ones who were being removed and kicked out, started to realize that this was probably just another thing that was going to benefit the people who were already in control of the country and the city. And so it wasn't long before people started to say, hey, wait a minute, why are you ripping down my house? And without giving me any notice, that can't be good for my family. I don't care if you build a football stadium that's going to turn into a bus depot in a year, I'd rather have my house. So yeah, there's mixed feelings about it. And I think people were discouraged. But I've spoken to some people. I spoke to some of the characters today, actually, because I've been off doing other things and I want to reconnect. And the general feeling that they told me in Rio now is that the Olympics has come and gone and hasn't really, no one's talking about it anymore. It's just finished. The circus has left town. There have been some infrastructure improvements. There is a metro station that was built at the bottom of a Rocinha there. So people are able to get to work easier, and there's a few other things. But generally, yeah, I think it kind of just came and went.
Yeah.
And a lot of construction companies made a lot of money.
Yeah, of course. And how was the change for you? Because probably when you started filming and when you first had the idea to make the film, you had a different idea or image of Rio and the favelas. And how is it afterwards, now here, presenting your film? What did you learn from this experience?
I think I reconnected with an experience that happened to me when I was very young, and it took me a while to realize what it was about this particular subject in this film that really drew me in and made me so passionate about it. And I found out after thinking about it, just kind of hit me one day, that when I was 15 or 14 or something, I went with my friend's church. I lived in Vancouver, and he's a Korean guy who went to a Korean church, and we went with his church in a van all the way down to Mexico, to Tijuana, and we met some kids in the slums of Tijuana. We gave out toys. And I remember being very young and impressionable and kind of going there expecting to see just horrible misery and like people crying on the streets everywhere and stuff. And then I just saw nothing but like happy people and like kids playing. And so, you know, the obvious kind of thought is, well, they don't know what they're missing. Certainly that has to be it. You know, if they could see what a flat screen TV was, they would be, you know, wanting that. And then I think over time it sort of set in that, you know, it's not really so much about the material things, but more about the sense of community, which I think we're missing, or at least I am in London. And when I was in the middle of making this film, I think it kind of hit me like that was, for me, that's it. It's like when I went there and saw these communities in action, and especially the people that were so proactive about their own communities and trying to make them a better place and connect with people around them, it's like, that's it. So I don't know if I learned a whole lot or whether I just reevaluated something that was a seed that was planted in my head when I was younger. But that was kind of the most powerful thing I got out of it, was that communities are few and far between now, especially in big cities, and they're kind of disappearing. It's all about the power of the individual now. It's about the selfie in front of, you know, the beach and all that kind of stuff. But when you see people who are truly embedded in a community, and they're not, you know, it's not because they chose to go live there, but that's where they live. It's just like, wow, these people have so much energy that I wish I could tap into.
Absolutely. One final question before opening to the floor. Because when I showed the clip before, as you quite correctly saw and commented on, it had a very perhaps bad energy, all the problems with the drug dealers and the sort of war between police and drug dealers, and the very honest and open way that the chief of police speaks about that in the 90s. And then you cut, and your film has this very good vibe in general, I think, you know, and people can see all the qualities you're talking about. And the gap between the two moments, well, there's lots of things happen. So, for instance, as Bob commented earlier, people got some income, you know, over the years, got a perhaps better wages than before, and so on. But also the UPPs are an important element in that. Probably if the UPPs didn't exist, you might not be able to film, perhaps, I don't know. Nobody knows, but the truth is that now it's much more accessible. The favelas are much more accessible. Yeah. And so what's your take on the UPPs? Because for some people, it's really important, because it had a direct effect in terms of less shootings and so on. But on the other hand, you have some problems as well. Yeah,
so basically the UPP police pacification program was and is, in my opinion, a very, very good idea on paper. Essentially, what I kind of was thinking about this for a while, what is it about these places that there is a dark energy to Rio, there's no doubt about it. When I first arrived to Rio, the flight from England always comes in late at night, so you arrive at like 9 or 10 or whatever, and you take a taxi, and I remember going down the motorway, and all of a sudden there's this wall on your right side, and there's kind of plexiglass, and you can sort of see through the cracks, and I thought, what's beyond there? And I asked the taxi driver, I said, why did they put up this wall here? Is it to stop me from seeing the favela? And he said, oh, no, it's to stop young children and dogs from running onto the highway and getting killed. And I thought, oh, okay, interesting. But once I got into Rio, and you know, my friend's wedding, so they had a nice apartment in Copacabana that they were staying in. I went up to the top of the balcony and looked across, and then you see the favela there at night, and all of the twinkling lights that are organically placed. You know, there's not like rows of streets or anything. And I just remember just feeling this draw, like there's, you know, there is a heart of darkness in that city for sure. It's, you know, there's no pretending that it's not there. And you see it in that film clip that you showed, and it's definitely there. But on the other hand, there's all this beauty and human warmth and just things that are extremely inspiring. So I think that for me, Rio is such an enigmatic place because it has both. It's got some of the worst things that any human beings could ever think about doing to each other. It happened there every single day. But then also some of the most uplifting and generous things that anyone could do for each other happen there at the same time. So it does have that dark heart, and I think if I was to try and make this film in the 90s when News from a Personal War was made, I probably could have gotten access, but instead of wandering around with a gringo tour guide, I would have been paying the drug dealer, I would have been paying the president of the Residents Association, who then would have paid off the drug dealer, etc. So I probably still would have seen all the happy things happening in the community unless there happened to be a shootout that day. It's easier for any one of you to walk around, if you go to Rio now and you want to go see a favela, give Jody a call, he'll show you around for sure. But it's different. Now, coming into the topic of the UPPs, the UPP idea was to basically fill the void where no state presence had existed. And if you analyze this situation, or at least the conclusion that I came to when I thought about it, was that this is basically medieval society. So you have a king of a land, and there's no state, there's no police, there's a king of the land, and that king has the final say on everything. So for instance, some of the positive things, which might be surprising when the favelas were not run by or didn't have the police presence, were that if someone was caught stealing, their hand would probably be shot off. If someone was caught raping, they would be put into a stack of tires and thrown gasoline and lit on fire. And so the punishments were extremely brutal and severe. And that being said, there was no rapes ever. And there was very few, if ever, a theft in the favela. Because everyone knew what the rules were, and the rules were absolutely concrete. And there was no judge, there was no going to court. It was if someone found out, and there's a lot of gossip in the community, that you did something wrong, you were history, you're gone. So the medieval kind of structure was that you knew what you had to do every single day, and you did that thing, and you didn't step over the line, and you didn't mess up anyone else's life because there was severe consequences. When the UPP came in and tried to fill that void, or at least implant themselves and bring the state into the picture, they were successful in stopping a lot of the shootouts, and the gangs weren't able to have the turf wars at first. But because they weren't burning people in sets of tires or shooting their hands off, there was kind of a question mark, I think, in some people who might tend to be criminal, going, oh wait, well, what can I get away with here now? Maybe, and then all of a sudden break-ins started going up, theft started going up, sexual abuse started going up in some of these communities. And the policeman now all of a sudden, who's always been seen as a crooked monster, and in a lot of cases they were, as you saw in that clip. He's describing some of his colleagues, but basically these guys now had to fill this huge void where the gangster would just kill people ruthlessly. And now they can't quite kill people straight off the bat. They sort of have to send them to court, and there's a process and all this. Criminals know that. So they kind of push the boundaries, and they see how much more they can get away with. And so that it presents a very complicated problem. The idea is great. It did solve a lot of problems in a lot of favelas. The one that Captain Rocha is walking around, Santa Marta, which is the same one you saw in the earlier clips, had 0 homicides. Up until very recently, they had 1. It used to have homicides every day. So that's a great example of where things turned around. There's a lot of tourists going there. People make money off the tourists who come and buy things. Hopefully, if you go there, please buy something. But then there's other favelas like Rocinha, which are gigantic, and it's just impossible to police the whole place. There's 250,000 people living there. So you've got the gang, which knows where to hide, and the police, which know where the gang are, but they don't really want to have a shootout all the time because there's going to be people getting caught in the middle. And so the gangs sort of pay the police, and the police sort of stay over here, and sometimes they mix and shoot each other up, like what happened while I was filming. So it is complicated. The UPP on paper, great idea. What they also promised to do at the same time was bring in UPP Social, which was meant to come in and build libraries, set up daycares, sort out some of the infrastructure problems like the garbage collection, etc. And what the state conveniently did was they brought in the police, military police, and they didn't bring in any of the state services. And so the guy whose brainchild this was is José Beltrame. He just quit. So he started the whole UPP thing. For years, everyone talked about how successful it is. They've lost so much money recently, and the state never brought the social stuff in. So he's just quit and said, I'm finished with this whole thing. So that just goes to show, you know, it's on the right track, but they just didn't follow through. And the community said, well, great, now we got police officers walking around here 24/7, but where's our library? How come our kid can't go to school yet? And that sort of thing. So it's definitely gray. I would say probably more positive than negative, but not without its problems.
And also some problems between the UPP and people living in there, because they still feel this sort of authoritarian approach.
Exactly. And you have to always remember that many of these police officers are getting paid very, very little. And almost all of them come from favelas themselves. Yeah. So these are not people that are, you know, going to great colleges and learning wonderful, you know, law enforcement tactics and stuff the whole time. Yeah, they do get some basic training, but they've come from a favela. They probably grew up in extreme violence. They've seen people getting killed in front of them. So they have that inside their heart and soul when they go to police these areas. And if some kid spits at them or makes some kind of comment, you know, a lot of them are tempted to just take that kid around the corner and smash his head into the wall. So there's a system of violence. There's like a deeply entrenched violence in Rio, as I'm sure you know. And that doesn't necessarily go away overnight. And I think that's the sad thing, is that it's so incredibly common. It's like we watch Hollywood films, you know, a Quentin Tarantino film, and you see people get sliced and diced every 2 seconds. Well, this actually happens like in front of people on a daily basis in a lot of these favelas. And sometimes some of the worst stories are of the police who've massacred people. There's been whole, you know, 15, 20 people completely just killed in broad daylight by the police. So the violence runs deep. The police, military police, as the captain mentioned in that clip, were started originally to protect the king, and also to keep the slaves from rebelling against the small elite. And that was the very first instance of military police, and they haven't changed since then. They've still been the military police, and they still have this kind of ethos in the background to protect the elite, not really to serve and protect like you see in other countries.
Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Hi, I was just wondering about the schools in the favela. So is there a state school system? What is like the literacy rate like? What's attendance like? And also, is the presence of the UPP felt in the schools? Like, do the gangs affect it a lot? Like, what goes on?
That's a really good question. So one thing I can say about favelas in Rio is that every single favela is completely unique and has its own character and its own set of, you know, circumstances. And so some favelas, like Santa Marta, is close to a decent school, which is just kind of at the bottom of the hill. Before the UPP, when there were shootouts, kids wouldn't be able to go to school because they couldn't leave their house. So there was a lot of missed attendance just by, you know, the nature of the violence that was happening at the time. So those kids, I think they go to a fairly decent school. They're also right next to a private school. So, you know, there's people that are paying stupid amounts of money to send their kids to fantastic schools, and then there's people that go to the state school. And I'm sure just like England, especially places like London, it's kind of a postcode lottery. But I imagine, and I don't know for sure, but I think the attendance is relatively good as long as there's nothing like violence or anything to stop them. That being said, there's a lot of communities, once you get out of the South Zone. I've been to communities outside of the South Zone, but it just so happened that the characters I was filming were in the South Zone favelas, which tend to be a lot safer. But once you go out into the north, it just gets crazy. It's like the wild, wild west out there, and you know, people are just constant shootings and everything. So I would imagine those kids don't make it to school quite as often. And in fact, there's a favela called Favela do Alemão, which is a funny story because it means like the German man's favela. And they call it that because it was actually a Polish farmer who used to own the land, and they went, oh, he's a German, it's the German man's favela. So that place is like the most notorious favela in all of Rio de Janeiro. It's massive. It's actually, a lot of these favelas are complexes. It's actually called the complex of Alemão. And that one is made up of many, 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 many favelas all over this huge hill. And it's always been the stronghold of the biggest gang, one of the biggest gangs called the Red Command. And when the police went in there, they actually successfully, at first, got rid of the gangs. And people started going to school, and actually it was Prince Harry or Prince William went there on a tour, and he wandered around the complex of the German, and said it was fantastic, and there was tours, and it was all wonderful. But then the gang took over, and it wasn't long before the gang completely ran this place again, even though there's UPP. And one of the schools, which is near the top, is completely full of bullet holes, because that's where the police and the gangs shoot at each other, and most of the bullets end up hitting the school. So that's a place where those kids are not going to school on a regular basis because their school is being shot to pieces, basically.
Yeah, I think that's one of the consequences in the favelas that got the UPPs. You could have potentially less shootouts. You have less problem for the schools, so you have less disruption, and etc. But on the other hand, as Alex pointed out, the favelas with UPPs, they are actually a minority in the whole city. The city is 6 million people city, and it's much, much bigger than just the South Zone, as Alex said. So the UPPs, they were planned to be in what they call the Olympic belt. So where you had these more tourist areas, where you had, the Olympics, Olympic venues and the World Cup venues. So the favelas next to these venues usually got UPPs. So actually the schools, generally speaking, in favelas in Rio, still suffer from this disruption with shootouts and etc. And it's always important to remind everybody of that, because there's a tendency to overemphasize what happens in the South Zone because it's the richest area of the city. And as Alex said, the North and the West Zone, which actually holds most of the population, is never talked about, and the things are still quite messy there. Another one?
Hi, I was just wondering about the, when you were talking to the police, we saw a lot of police in the background, and you were talking to one police officer. He was obviously fearful of reprisals. So I was wondering how much opportunity you had to speak with other police officers, if they were fearful of being on film or interacting with you just in case, anybody saw the film or knew their face or knew where they lived, etc.
Yeah, so the police that you saw walking around in the background of that shot were not the kind of people I would probably try and talk to, especially at that point in time. They're around the corner, a couple of young local guys started telling me how those police were paid off and how they'd come to the top of the hill every weekend on Friday night, and the gangsters with all their guns pointing in the air give them a big bag of money, et cetera, et cetera. And I was filming this, and I didn't ask them to tell me that, but I was filming, and they told me all that information. I said, okay, guys, you better shut up. And as they were telling me that, those police officers appeared in the background. I have the shot where they were telling me that, and the police officers appeared in the background. I was like, okay, yeah, we're all done now. Thanks, guys. Thanks for telling me about the new McDonald's down the street. And so, yeah, you definitely don't want to go poking around the wrong tree in the favelas. The guy that I interviewed, Captain Rocha, he was introduced to me by a great fixer and journalist friend of mine named Germán Aranda, who actually writes for, or at the time was writing for El Mundo newspaper. And he had done a newspaper article on this guy, and that's how I met him. But what attracted me to the story of Captain Rocha was several things. One, I think he seemed to be very genuine, and he seemed to really truly believe in what he was doing, and he actually really wanted to help. And I could have very easily tried to find a really crooked cop and sort of, but I think the situation is so complicated that it's, not all the cops are crooked, not all of them are good. Some are good and some are bad. And I kind of wanted to let the residents talk about the bad ones without having to, risk anything to, disappear by filming them. But I also wanted to show that the one who really believed, because I think there are, quite a few of them. They give up their own personal time a lot of times. So they'll come, Captain Rocha teaches refereeing. So he's a football referee, and he runs camps to teach kids how to be referees, which is much more realistic than trying to teach all the kids that they're going to be, you know, the next Neymar. And these kids can then referee lots of football matches around the city and make a bit of extra cash. So that's something that he does on his own personal time. And there's other guys that do like capoeira lessons and all sorts of stuff. So no, I definitely didn't want to go interviewing some of those guys I saw in Rocinha and other places, because yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot of darkness there, and you can get yourself into trouble really quickly. There was a case of a man who disappeared in Rocinha, where Jody lives, named Amarildo, and it was a huge, huge thing. It became a big political thing in Rio, because he was taken away for interrogation, and he was never found. And they have CCTV camera of him disappearing in the back of a car, and nobody knows where he is to this day. And I interviewed a couple people about that case, and I could just tell it was going down this very, very dark road where it was becoming investigative journalism, and I'd have to start going undercover and all kind of, and I thought, no, that's not my film. My film's about communities, you know, so I left that out. But yeah, you can get yourself into trouble there. There's been journalists who disappeared and they were found decapitated and stuff, so it's pretty messy.
We also have some questions from Twitter.
Oh, Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah. One, ultimately, do you think that tourism is helping or harming the favelas?
I think the right kind of tourism, i.e. not the Jeep tourists, do help the favelas. If there's people, you know, there's kind of a thing that's becoming a bit of a cliche now, but there's like tourists and there's travelers. You know, if you go to a place and you stay in an all-inclusive resort and you poke your head out once in a while to buy, you know, something that's meant to be from that country but it's actually made overseas, you know, don't go to the favela, because you probably, you know, it just wouldn't be the right kind of experience. But if you're a traveler and you really want to see how people live on the ground in certain places, and you want to get to know people, and, you know, then go on a walking tour with someone who's certified and who knows the area very well. And that does help the community for two reasons. One, because it creates a connection. There's like a cross-pollination, if you will, of cultures, and the people who live in the favelas can get to know people from all over the world and ask them about where they live, and, you know, talk about music, and, oh, you like Bob Marley? I like Bob Marley. But then there's also the tourists or the travelers who get to, you know, get their eyes open and say, wow, you know, not all these people are crooks and criminals. In fact, it's probably safer to be in the favela than it is in Copacabana. And so I think that's a very positive thing, and especially if people spend their money, you know, they buy an acai like they were doing in the film, which is a fantastic and very healthy drink. So all of that stuff is good. It's all about the context and how people go. If they go like they're on safari, it's just not good. The only thing that's good for is the guy who's running the safari.
I just wanted to ask, because it is like the original concept was about these foreigners who are living there. So why did you choose to, in the first place, sort of make it the focus of the narrative, these foreigners living there, instead of like the natives? And did you find that while you were filming it, that focus kind of shifted a bit in unexpected ways or in expected ways?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So when I went there and started filming in 2013, I started with interviews like with Captain Rocha. I met Jody, who was at the time working in a favela in Vidigal, and I just kind of, you know, asked him a couple questions, but I didn't think he was going to be, you know, a major character in the film. I did a lot of interviews which are not in this film, and it breaks my heart because I met so many incredible people and heard so many amazing stories that, you know, when you make a film and you get into the edit, you know, there's the obvious cliche that you got to kill your darlings, and there's stuff that just doesn't fit into the thread of the narrative. It doesn't weave through everything. And so I had to leave so many fantastic interviews out. And the reason that I chose to tell it through those three British guys was because I thought they would be a good vehicle for people outside of Brazil to connect, because I was hoping that people might say, well, that could be me. You know, my girlfriend just dumped me like 2 weeks ago. Hell, I'm going to go off to Rio. The place looks amazing, you know. And maybe through their eyes, you would get to put yourself in that place and say, well, maybe I could be this person living in here, and those people could be my neighbors. I also was conscious of the fact that having an entire film of subtitles is sometimes a bit difficult for people. And I wanted to bounce the gringos and the locals off each other so that you could kind of see a more complete picture.
Could you just give us one of the stories that couldn't make to the film?
Okay, one of the stories that didn't make the film was there's this amazing guy named Gilmar Lopez who runs tours in a favela called Tabajaras Cabritos, which is in Copacabana. And his father used to be the king drug dealer of the hill back in the 70s and 80s. And when he was young, his father was killed, shot in the back in a drug deal. And Gilmar grew up under the wing of his grandmother, who was a religious woman and who was very strong. And she kept him out of that world. And so he could have easily gone, and especially, with a lot of people all around the world in violent societies, people go for revenge. That guy killed my father, I'm going to get powerful enough so I can come back and kill him. But Gilmar grew up under the wing of his grandmother, and he has a very strong personality. He's a really, really outgoing, gregarious, intelligent man who actually dated an English girl for a while, so he came to live in England, and he used to work at some kind of pizza restaurant at the O2 Arena, and he got to experience England and the whole way that society works out here. And he made some really interesting comments about one of the things that he found interesting was the welfare system. And he said, there's so many people in that country that just live off the dole, and they just don't do anything. They sit on their sofa, and he's like, people here, if they had that money, they would do this and they would do that. And Rio's a kind of anti-welfare state, if you will. And some of the things he said were kind of interesting in just those comparisons. Like, what do you have when you strip everything away and there's no safety net? Certainly people fall through the cracks and end up in hospitals or on the street, and horrible things happen. But you also have a huge contingent of people that, because there's nobody there, holding their hand, they go out and they have to make it work somehow or another. And he's one of these people. And so now he has a tour company which has been certified by the mayor of Rio de Janeiro. He brings loads of money into the community, and he's just an all-around great person. I couldn't fit him into the film as hard as I tried. I tried to jam his story in there, but it just pulled everything away. So that was just one of them. And I also met a really amazing lady who practices African religion called Yoruba. And she brought me into her religious cavern that she made. And she was talking about her son who died from meningitis, and his picture was on the wall. It was this old, dilapidated picture, but she said it with this humility and this kind of well, this is what life brings, but you kind of move past it in a way. And she brought me into this religious cavern with all of these really cool idols and stuff. And she was a really big, powerful, amazing woman to listen to. But again, it just couldn't fit into the edit. So yeah. Lots and lots of really amazing and very interesting people.
Well, thank you so much for this evening. And if you'd like to join us at the Union Bar, it's just around. Also, follow us on our new Instagram, oxford.club. You've got your smartphones in your pockets, be sure to follow. And thank you so much.
My pleasure. I just want to say one more thing. If you are interested in finding out what's going on with some of these guys, Jody's program, his school that he runs, is called favelaphoenix.org, and it's completely and utterly run on donations. There's volunteer teachers there. It's going really, really well. They're completely full up and basically overbooked now. So all of these, someone asked about education, all of these kids who want to learn English are piling into his school and learning English for free. And this school is run on donations, so it's called favelaphoenix.org. You can look it up and donate some money if you feel like it. And also, Favela Brass is the free music school that Tom runs, which is also fantastic. I'm sure if you go to Rio one day and you want to visit it, just connect on his Facebook page, Favela Brass. It's also run completely by donations. Sometimes people traveling to Rio bring an instrument or something that they're not using anymore. He has the curry club that he does once a month to raise money, and people come and buy curry, especially all the British foreigners living there who miss curry. So check those out for sure. And they wanted to let you know, because I told them I was coming here tonight, that they're all doing really well. All the kids in Favela Brass are still in the program and they're excelling. They played during the Olympics. If you saw the opening, whatever happened before the opening ceremony on BBC One, it was at the end of the program, those kids featured, and they got to play for everybody in the whole city of Rio during the Olympics. So they made their goal, and they showed that hard work pays off. And I think they're learning really good lessons. So yeah, and if you want to go to the maze, if you go to Rio, the first Friday of every month, Bob hosts the jazz night at the maze, which is definitely worth seeing. All the people that are working at the maze are locals, and a lot of them are, you know, paying for their kids to go through school and stuff by you going there and buying cocktails and listening to great jazz. And Tom also plays in that band, so that's what I want to say. I got to get a picture of you beautiful people. One. There we go. Thanks again for coming.